So Russia says it has suspended all nuclear notifications with the United States. This decision could have massive implications on global security, and we're to discuss the implications next. Russian state media is reporting that Moscow is suspending all nuclear notifications with the United States, and that includes alerts on test missile launches and everything that falls under the 1988 Nuclear New START Treaty. That's the only bilateral agreement left between the world's two largest nuclear powers.
Yeah, senior U.S. officials previously told CNN that Russia and the U.S. are not providing any nuclear data to each other. CNN national security reporter Natasha Bertrand is joining us with more on this. So, Natasha, another example of a continued breakdown in the post-Cold War order here. Any reaction from the Pentagon on this latest announcement?
Well, Bianna, the Pentagon has not issued an official statement about this comment from Russia's deputy foreign minister, announcing essentially that Russia is going to halt its participation, its notification to the U.S. under its New START treaty obligations. Of course, that treaty was really the only remaining treaty between two nuclear superpowers regarding nuclear force posture and the level of nuclear warheads and missiles that each country actually had. So this was really a check on each country's kind of nuclear force posture there. But the U.S., while, anticipating this, they're still saying that they're condemning it. They anticipated it because just last month, Russia pulled out of this treaty. They said that they were going to suspend their participation in it. And so the U.S. had been anticipating perhaps that the Russians would also suspend the notification part of this treaty as well. But, it is not coming as a major surprise to the U.S. And in fact, it was a senior Pentagon official during a hearing just yesterday who disclosed that during a regular kind of communication with the Russians about their treaty obligations, kind of trying to get them to disclose how many nuclear warheads they have as part of this treaty, which happens roughly twice a year, the Russians then responded that they were actually not going to provide that information anymore. And this was disclosed yesterday by that Pentagon official, who later said, well, if the Russians are not going to provide this information to us, then we are not going to give it to the Russians either. Here's what he said.
We are going to continue to examine what other diplomatic countermeasures are appropriate. And what we're trying to do, sir, is balance both responding to Russia's irresponsible behavior, but to continue to demonstrate what we believe a responsible nuclear power's action should be.
Now, a senior State Department official did say moments ago that they have not received an official notice from the Russians saying that they are suspending the notifications as part of the New START treaty. But look, another big question here is whether, as part of this suspension of notifications, the Russians are also not going to tell the U.S. when they do tests of missile launches, for example. And just last month, Russia carried out an intercontinental ballistic missile test that they did notify the U.S. of as part of that New START treaty. Unclear now whether those kinds of notifications are going to continue either.
And a mix-up of that scale could prove disastrous. Natasha Bertrand reporting from the Pentagon. Thank you so much. Let's bring in Daryl Kimball. He's a nuclear expert and executive director for the Arms Control Association. Sir, thanks so much for sharing part of your afternoon with us. Just walk us through the implications of this decision, because obviously a mix-up over a nuclear test could be disastrous, as I said a moment ago, but there are far worse things that could happen here, no?
Well, this is yet another very troubling development in the deterioration of U.S.-Russian nuclear risk reduction dialogue. As Natasha said, the New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty of 2010 requires that each side provide information on missile test launches, and you want to do that because you don't want the other side to believe that a test missile launch is an actual launch of a missile in a hostile action. The treaty also requires a detailed exchange of data on the number of warheads, bombers that carry the warheads, and missiles, so that each side can then inspect at their facilities, each other's facilities, whether those declarations are accurate. So we're not going to be getting that from the Russians. The Biden administration is calibrating the response. It's important that we continue, as they've said they're going to do, to provide our missile test notifications. We're going to be withholding, because the Russians are the data that describes how many warheads are at which bases, et cetera. But this is just another sign that this treaty is in trouble. It is due to expire in less than 3 years, in February 2026. And I think the bigger issue is whether the U.S. and Russia will be able to agree to stay below the limit set by this treaty, 1,550 deployed warheads on long-range bombers and missiles. The Russians, thankfully, have said that they're going to stay within those limits, but that's not a sure thing given the war and the fact the treaty is going to expire one way or another.
Yeah, it was seen as a positive sign and victory when President Biden and President Putin were able to extend the treaty for another 5 years. But obviously, a lot has changed since then. And what's also notable is Putin's decision to suspend the participation and not withdraw completely. And that's leading many to believe that he's using this as leverage and perhaps blackmail in an attempt to lift sanctions that have been imposed on Russia since the start of the war. How dangerous of a precedent would that set if, in fact, and I don't believe the U.S. would do so, but if in fact these sanctions were lifted because of these types of threats?
Well, it's unclear why Putin has decided to do this. I mean, if he thinks this is going to provide leverage in easing the United States support for Ukraine's defense or the sanctions on Russia because of its war of aggression, that's clearly not going to happen. There are many inside the Russian defense establishment who disagree with this decision. It's unclear what his game plan is, but I think it is very interesting that Putin has said that they're not going to exceed the limits set by this treaty, at least for now. That suggests to me and many others that Russia does want to maintain limits on these most deadly arsenals. We don't want a nuclear arms race. The Russians don't want a nuclear arms race. But if these limits are lifted, or the treaty expires without a replacement, we will, for the first time in 50 years, not have any constraints on the U.S. and the Russian arsenals, the world's two largest. And that could open the door for an increase of the arsenals, an arms race that could not just involve the U.S. and Russia, but possibly China, which is also starting to build up. It's currently smaller, but it could be much bigger arsenal in the years ahead.
And Daryl, you actually predicted my next question. Doesn't that embolden other players around the world to boost up their arsenals or to, in the case of Iran, create a nuclear weapon? And then you wind up with a chain reaction where perhaps Saudi Arabia pursues a nuclear weapon as well.
Well, I think the countries that are most concerned about the dynamics between the United States and Russia and whether they fulfill their responsibilities to constrain their deadly arsenals, it's China and our own European allies. The Chinese actually have come out and said that they would like the United States, they urge the United States and Russia to work together to implement New START and to continue efforts to constrain their arsenals. It's not in China's interest for Russia and the United States to increase their stockpiles. Remember, China has about 400 nuclear weapons today. The United States and Russia each have about 4,000. So China does not want to see that scenario. Our allies in Europe also do not want to see Russia building up its arsenal for whatever reason. They already have enough security concerns with the war in Ukraine, with Russia's aggressive behavior. So it's very much in the interest of the United States, our allies, to continue to press Putin to re-engage at the diplomatic table, or at the very least, to continue to pledge to constrain the Russian arsenal, keep below these limits until such time as we can negotiate with a partner, Russia. That's not possible right now.
Yeah, and Putin continues to be reckless in his rhetoric about his nuclear arsenal, just a few days ago announcing that he would transfer some tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus in the coming months. Daryl Kimball, thank you so much for your perspective and expertise. We appreciate it.